Hey everybody, welcome back to another installment of an inside look into the book, Oh Deafo. Today it's very wet and gloomy and rainy, and you might hear an occasional drip, drip, drip in the background. But maybe doing this chapter with you will bring some sunshine and light into my life and maybe into yours. So beautiful, so touching. Anywho, we are today doing chapter 9. Chapter 9 is the chapter about sign language, and it was easily the most difficult of all the chapters to write. I would lie awake in my bed at night and just in a cold sweat and wake up thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to offend every deaf person on the planet with this chapter. How do I tell this chapter? Oh my goodness. It just about killed me. It was so hard. But I did write it, even though I wanted to leave it out, but I kept it in because it felt wrong not to address sign language in a book about deafness. And I really wanted to be true to how the kid version of me felt and what the kid version of me did. I needed to be true to that. So before we start this chapter, let me remind you of a few things. So I was born with hearing, as you remember, and so that means for the first 4.5 years of my life, I could hear. And then I got sick, and my hearing was something that was taken from me. So I lost it. No more hearing. So for the first 4.5 years of my life, I identified as a hearing person. Suddenly, I have a new identity as a deaf person, but for many, many years, I still identified myself as a hearing person. So, in a lot of ways, let me back up a little bit. My hearing aids identify me as a deaf person, and they felt like something that could be hidden. And as a kid, it was important for me to keep all that stuff hidden because I wanted to be like everybody else. I still wanted to be that hearing person that I used to be. Doing sign language in my kid mind meant that it sort of would have solidified the fact that I was deaf if I started to do sign language. So it just wasn't something that I was ready to do. And hopefully that will make sense to you. The other thing, before I continue, it's really important for you to remember that the book is from kid me's point of view. Not adult me, but kid me. Any kind of attention that I got for my hearing loss when I was a kid was not a good thing to me. I did not want to be different. And there's an expression, it's called, it's something like dance like no one's looking. Well, I'm so introverted, I'm so shy, especially as a kid, that I couldn't even dance if no one was looking. I can't dance if everybody's looking. I can't dance if no one's looking. And in some ways, sign language feels like, or at least to me as a kid, it felt like dance or performance. And those were things that I wasn't comfortable doing because I was so introverted and I did not want to invite anybody's judgment or staring or anything like that. So I kept my hands down. But again, kid me. This book is about kid me and kid me's point of view. So just remember that. Adult me thinks very differently, as you will find out. The first page of chapter 9 is on page 102. And this is just, fourth grade is getting ready to start. It's the end of summer. I'm excited about school starting because I really did love school in a lot of ways. And I'm excited about everything except I still have to wear the phonic ear. Not too thrilled. And then on page 103, that first panel is all about how when you start a new year of school, there's that feeling that you can start school as a new and better and improved version of you. Yay! Fresh start. That's especially true when you go off to college and nobody knows you. That's a definite fresh start. But no matter where you go, there you are, and you can't really completely get away from yourself. But this page continues with a misunderstanding, and I got to speak to somebody that I'd never met before, and I'm thinking, okay, this is my chance to pretend that I'm a hearing person again, and maybe I'll even fool her. But as you know, if you've read the book, that there's a misunderstanding where Bonnie, this new character, says, well, hey, I've told everyone else, so I might as well tell you. My grandma makes pie. And I say, cool. What? And that's happened so many times in my life where I misinterpret what the person is saying, and I just kind of fake my way through, or maybe I don't understand it at all, but I fake my way through it and I give it the wrong response. And boy, did I ever, because Bonnie says, I said my grandma may die. Oh, I am so sorry. So awful. So I've had lots of miscommunications like this. One of the things that you should notice is that in panel 3, Bonnie's face is very neutral. It doesn't have much emotion. She says, my grandma may die. Very matter of fact. If her face had been sadder looking, oh, my grandma may die, I probably would have understood her. But her face was very neutral. So, her grandma makes pie. Yay! So that's something to point out. And anyway, many mistakes over the years. A lot of them are kind of naughty in my mind because that's often the way my mind goes. And when you grow up, look for me and I will tell you some of those naughtier misunderstandings because they are very, very funny, at least to me. Moving on. Page 104. We see that Bonnie quickly figures out that I'm deaf and sees the chords, figures it all out, and gets very, very excited. And Bonnie is a character a lot like Missy in Chapter 8, someone who is, well-meaning, but also very excited to be able to share this skill and to do something that I call signing at me. Not signing with me or signing for me, but signing at me. A way to get attention from all the other kids around us. And then by the end of this page, in my sort of fantasy mind, she turns into a mime. And probably all of you know what a mime is. One of the most famous mimes was Marcel Marceau. And mimes are basically performers who perform without words. They use their bodies and body language and that sort of thing to give a presentation. And it's often very funny and sometimes very moving, but mimes were sort of this comedy running gag through the 70s and 80s. It seemed like a lot of movies from that period often had mimes thrown in, sort of like if it took place in New York City, there would always be a mime thrown in to that 80s movie. Anyway, she turns into a mime and tells me on page 105 that you are special. I cannot tell you how many times I heard this expression as a child. It is one of my least favorite expressions of all time. I would much rather be told that I was cool or funny or smart, but not special. Special means basically you're doing good in spite of that thing that makes you different from everyone else. It's the word that really grates. It's one thing to say, oh, this cake is really special, or what a special occasion. That's different, much different. So, and I think I addressed that word later in this chapter. So, yeah, yuck, yuck. Moving on page 105, a very important line here. And sure enough, when somebody signs at you like that, everybody else stares at you. And that's the number one reason I didn't learn sign language, because I felt like if I did, I would be getting unwelcome attention. That's just me. And that's just me as a kid. Very different attitude now. And any deaf viewers who are watching this who use sign language, you can ignore all of this. Remember, it is how I felt as a kid. So then on page 106, so I did indeed take a sign language class for several weeks, I think, and I can't remember how many weeks we did it, but it was totally all Mom's idea. And her intentions were 100% good. I think she saw it as another mode of communication that could help me. And I actually think she's right, and I probably should have learned it, but there were so many things working against me, including my own introverted personality, that I just fought it from day one. And even as a parent myself, I think I probably would have done exactly what she did. But kid me was not having it at all. On page 107, we show up at the church. And in the book, I made it seem like we were going to my own church, which was St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Salem, Virginia. And a beautiful church, beautiful windows, and it was a really, really neat place to go. But in real life, we didn't go to my church. We went to this other church up the road, also in town, but west, out west, way far away, it felt like. And but I used my own church because I had better photo reference of my church, and also my memories really helped me just make it so that the sign language class happened at St. Paul. So in real life, Jenny went to my church, as did Martha. We'll meet Martha in a little bit. But Martha went there and Jenny went there, and Jenny was in my sign language class at this different church. She and her mom also came, and that wasn't very fun either. But I took her out of this chapter just because it felt complicated to put her in. On the last panel of page 107, but before that, we meet our sign language instructor, Mrs. Blankenship, who I have completely made up because I have no memory of what the sign language instructor looks like, because I think I spent most of the time in class going like this. Not looking, not participating, definitely not looking at the teacher. So she has completely made up her name, the way she looks. No idea what she looked like. So then on panel 107, in panel 107, I'm really tongue-tied this morning, the sign language instructor asked if anybody in the room is deaf or hard of hearing, and my mom's like, yeah, that one is. But it really felt like that, but it was more like my mom was just very proud that I was there. She has never been embarrassed about my deafness or saw it as anything but what it was, just being deaf, wearing hearing aids, whatever. But I did not feel that way, obviously. Then on page 108. So, as you know, reading this chapter, I'm a little jerk in almost the entire thing. And so Mrs. Blankenship's role is very, very important because she is expressing adult me's point of view about sign language. And so she's a very important character in this chapter. She gets to say all the good things about sign language, the important things that people need to know about sign language, and so she's a great counterpoint to Kid Me. And I'll go ahead and read what she says. She says, let's talk about American Sign Language. It's the main language used by deaf people, and it is vital for their communication with other deaf people and with their families and friends. Many hearing folks think that sign language is a simple language, but that is not true at all. Sign language is quite different from spoken English. It's a very rich language, a very complex language. All of those things are true, and but it took me a long time to respect those things. So yay for Mrs. Blankenship for bringing in some truth. Then, on that same page, my hearing aid batteries run down. So this never happened, but I put it in this chapter because, number one, I wanted to make sure that somewhere in the book I show the experience of what happens when your hearing aid batteries run down. Hearing aid batteries last about 7 to 10 days, and I think I mentioned this in a previous installment of our little series here, that if you don't have extra batteries with you, then you're out of luck. So, anywho, I put it in this chapter also because I liked showing that there are moments where I can't use my hearing aids, they're not doing me any good, and here's an example of where sign language really could have helped me. And Mom actually points out this fact on page 109. And it's been a while since we've seen empty speech balloons like the ones on this page, but they are empty because Cece, because my character cannot hear anything. Her batteries have run down. So I really like this page. I like how much of a jerk I am on that last panel in 109. I don't think so, but also showing that I do have the ability to lip read my mother, but lip reading is so much easier with sound from your hearing aid. And once again, sign language probably could have helped me in this situation. Page 110 and 111 is just basically the sign language instructor, Mrs. Blankenship, showing us all these different signs and showing me continuing to be a little jerk and not participating and not being, not even trying. But I was so self-conscious and so just, I just was not ready and did not feel like doing it. So I get fussed at on the end of page 111. Not really fussed at, but Mrs. Blankenship kindly says, why aren't you participating? It would be so much better for you and more fun for all of us if you participated. And of course, I'm like, oh, because I don't like to be in trouble. But yeah, these 2 pages are really interesting to me because I'm rarely a jerk, I hope. But I know I was then. And I really did feel like, as the only deaf person there, I really did feel like a little guinea pig. Like everybody was experimenting on me and trying out these new signs on the deaf person. So that's probably not true, but that is what it felt like. On page 112, as much as I hated it, my mom loved sign language, and she picked up a lot of signs in this class and used them around the house with me all the time, and they drove me nuts. And the one that drove me the most nuts was wait. Like, you're going to have to wait for it. So it was always like, wait. No, I don't want to wait. Put your hands down. And the other one that aggravated me was when she asked me if I needed to use the toilet. Hopefully I've got my signs right. But, I really hated that. So that just felt like she was rubbing it in. Once again, she probably wasn't. But I was so sensitive to all of this that I just, she drove me nuts. So, of course, the El Deafo fantasy that happens on page 113 is El Deafo against her own mother, the amazing Mighty Mom. And as you know from this page, El Deafo is no match for Mighty Mom. I loved how Mighty Mom says, "Do you need to tinkle before I lock these handcuffs? For good?" And remember, Mighty Mom is super sweet. Just nothing works on her. "Oh, Mighty Mom, can you not see that I am able to talk to you right now without using my hands? You're so cute when you beg." You know, that always cracked me up, showing this mom that was above anything her daughter might say. That really got my funny bone. But then, oh no, on page 114, fantasy becomes reality. And in the book, Cece kicks her mom in the leg really, really hard. And guess what? That happened in real life. It really did. My mom and I think Jenny and her mom, and maybe my siblings, were all walking down this hallway to go to the sign language class. It hadn't started yet for that evening. And the rage was just boiling inside of me. Mom, I don't want to go. I'm sick of this. No. And it felt like she wouldn't listen. So what did I do? I kicked her in the leg. And I've never kicked her since. Thank goodness. Not my best moment as a child or as a human being, kicking your own mother in the shin. But I made my point. And she said, "Okay, we're not doing this anymore. It's all over." And I was flooded with relief, but I also felt really bad that I had hurt her, and I knew that I was being a jerk. But anyway, that ended the classes really quickly. 115 is a really important page because it expresses a lot of my feelings as a kid about what it was like to feel different. I hate that class. Everybody's signing at me like I already know sign language just because I'm deaf. And my mom says, "No one's signing at you. They're trying to sign with you to help you." Well, I hate it. And as far as helping, it'll help people stare at me is what it'll do. Look at that little deaf girl. Isn't she special? Well, you are special. Mom! Just like every kid is special. Oh, good grief. And then I think, Mom thinks special means great or cool. If only special means you're not like me. You're weird. I hate that word. So that just about says it all. moving on page 116, Mom takes me to a like a Dairy Queen or a McDonald's to get a treat. And even though we didn't go to a restaurant after I kicked her, this is exactly the kind of thing she didn't do. If we had a bad day, me or my siblings, if one of us had a bad day, or if we'd had an argument or that kind of thing, she would often say, well, let's go to Burger King, let's go to McDonald's or Dairy Queen and have a little treat and make this better. So she really did do stuff like that. And this scene in the restaurant really did happen, where I did see the couple doing sign language, but it didn't happen right after the sign language class. But so this part always seemed a little unbelievable to me, and I'm sure it might seem that way to you too, but it works really well to put it here, just to have that contrast. And I'm trying to show that there's a big difference between someone, a hearing person signing, especially, I want to make sure I don't put my foot in my mouth here. There's just a difference between a hearing person signing at a deaf person who doesn't want sign language, and that was me as a kid. And then the difference between that and two people signing who use it every day, and it's their primary mode of communication, and they're good at it, and it's a mutual thing. Very, very different. And when you get to see sign language used in this way, it really is an amazing thing. And not even that, it just is. And that's the way it should be. It should feel natural, and it is. So I'm in great awe and admiration of it here on these pages. And I ask the $1 million question, or one of $2 million questions. The first one being, if I use sign language, will everybody stare at me the way I'm staring at them, because I am staring at them on page 117. And then I ask the other $1 million question, which I'm sure all of you watching this have asked yourself this at some point. Why do I even care what other people think? Why should you care what other people think? You shouldn't, but often we all do at one point or another. Heavy chapter, heavy feelings. I regret to say that I am almost 50 years old and I still do not know very much sign language. There are lots of reasons for that. One of the main ones is that even though by the end of this book, El Deafo, it seems like I've made peace with a large portion of my deafness, that didn't happen until much, much later, by the time I was about 40. So I'm probably much readier to learn it now, and I visit many deaf schools, or I have visited many deaf schools over the years, and one of my favorite parts is having the kids teach me sign language, and then we have a great time with it. But time is finite. It's a very difficult language, and you know, the older you get, the harder it is to learn a new language, and sign language is right up there with brand new, difficult new language that is just hard. But I really should, and one of these days, maybe I will surprise you and be somewhat fluent. But it is really cool. And once again, it just is. It's a magnificent thing that, just like the English language, it just is. Or any other language, any other spoken language, it just is. So that's the most difficult chapter of the book. Hopefully everybody still likes me to some degree. And we will move on next week to chapter 10, which I believe is when we meet the amazing Martha. Indeed it is. So I may have a little treat in store for you on that. But in the meantime, I hope you have a lovely, lovely week. And I will see you next time. Bye.